And joining us today is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Como. He personally offers and leads public and private tours, as well as presentations of historical sites within communities throughout the state of Massachusetts. Currently, the communities he has chosen to focus on this year are Holyoke, Chicopee, South Hadley, and East Hampton, and also Granby and Amherst as well. His tours spotlight on local canals, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks, streets, and selected historical houses within each community. In today's episode, we will be discussing the St. Mary's Church, located in the community of Northampton, Massachusetts. So tell us of the history of the St. Mary's Church in Northampton.
It's the most important church in Hampshire County of Massachusetts, Catholic Church, and it started very early on, probably in the year 1844, and it was made on King Street in Northampton. If that is true, then it actually is probably the second oldest church in western Massachusetts. Now, the church you see there now is not the original. That's the second one. So the church that's there now was made in 1881, and it replaced a wooden church. And it's also in a different position now. It's now a corner that's at least a half mile away from its old location. Okay, so we're going to talk about today are some of the early pastors, and we'll also talk about the future of what would be like for the St. Mary's. And what happened to all the many Catholic churches in Northampton. They seem to have gone away somehow, but they're still there. All right, so this is a great parish. It was a mission church of the first church ever in western Massachusetts called the St. Matthew's Church. That was in Springfield, in what is now Chicopee, though. And it was led by a very strong mission, and then it was led by a first founder pastor that was also very strong and developed many Catholic churches around western Massachusetts. So its history in the very beginning was strong, and it ended up doing what most Catholic churches do, started up a school, a high school, of course a convent, and of course the rectory. And it became the center of all Catholic activity in Hampshire County. It had its own cemetery, which is enormous, and it's only about a mile and a half away from there. And even that cemetery was moved itself, just like the church was moved in location.
And tell us about some of the early pastors of the St. Mary's Church.
All right. Patrick Mice is the first true pastor. And what I mean by that, any pastor before that was called a mission pastor, would come from one of the churches in Chicopee, one of St. Matthew's, our holy name, and go up there and say the Mass. He lasted there from 1866 to 1872. Then Michael Barry lasted from 1872 to 1889, which set the development level in a strong direction. And these pastors, for the most part, are buried in St. Mary's Cemetery. And that's very common that you have these founders, if the cemetery is beautiful, being buried in their cemetery church. And then John Kenny from 1889 to 1917, which is 28 years and more stability, especially with the school. And then Thomas Cummins, 1817 to 1961. That's right, 44 years he was there. And so it really set the parish in the correct direction to be a strong location, with the parishioners being very active, the school being very strong. You remember, they didn't charge tuition, so students go there free. And the parishioners really would love the place. And it grew so that other parishes would spot off it, including the St. Immaculate Conception in East Hampton, the St. Mary of Assumptions in Williamsburg, the St. Bridget's in Amherst, would all come off of this church. And that's saying a lot. You have that much development from it.
And really quick, before we continue with our interview, just to fill our listeners in, To find out more information, or if you are interested in signing up for any of his various tours, check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. And there you can find any of his podcasts and videos of the stops along each of his tours, as well as photos and text of the historical sites throughout as well. And for private tours and other inquiries, you can email him directly at bobcat4214 @yahoo.com. And his tours make for fun, educational, outdoor activities for families and group parties. So getting back to our interview, what will the present and then the future be like at St. Mary's?
All right, the present is, as of this year, 2024, it's been sold to a private individual. And so thus, for the first time, St. Mary's Church is out of the hands of the Catholic Church. And for the past 10 years before this, it was joined together. We'll talk about that in the next part, or next question. But the future, well, I don't know what this private individual is going to be doing. The church does want the stained glass removed from there. They told the individual it belongs to them. I think he agreed. So a lot of the implements inside the church, plus the glass, are going to be taken out and kept by the Catholic Church, which is wonderful. Now, if the individual ever takes down the church, it would be sad. I hope at least he makes a portion of it stay a park that honors the existence of that church there. Maybe the bell can be there. There's already a statue and a grotto there at that location. And the reason why, it's such a beautiful church at a very, very busy intersection, right next to Smith College, right next to the downtown area, and next to other churches. There's two other churches right in that area, and there's one up the street, so forth. So I hope it stays in Northampton, stays up, and also stays in great shape. And if they do something with it, making sure it's honorable usage.
And in general, what has happened to the Catholic churches of Northampton?
All right, all five of them have been combined together. That happened about a dozen years ago. The churches' names are St. Mary's Church, St. John Cantius Polish Catholic Church, Sacred Heart Church, Our Lady of Annunciation Church, and the Blessed Sacrament Catholic Church. They've all been combined into one church and one parish. That's St. Elizabeth and Seton, and that's on King Street. And that church is a nice church in itself. It's the former Sacred Heart Church. And so all parishioners now go there. They do have some mass and prayer groups meeting at Our Lady Annunciation Church. The Blessed Sacrament doesn't seem to be open at all. St. John Cantius is having some CPA repairs done to it, and St. Mary's is sold. So, a lot joining together into one. They only need one Catholic church in Northampton. The population of Catholics has decreased, and so they only need that. But the churches are so beautiful, hopefully they can keep them active, either as Protestant churches, as social centers, or as other things that are appropriate for a nice environment like that.
And thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours and your historical topics of your expertise. And we want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And check out a large selection of our other podcasts at his website, as well as on SoundCloud.com. And be sure to stay up to date with new podcasts and videos posted daily. Discussing the St. John's Cantius Polish Catholic Church, located in Northampton, Mass. So tell us of the history of the church campus.
All right, St. John's Cantius is the Polish ethnic group Roman Catholic Church within Northampton. And of course, of the three major groups that came to Massachusetts, they came last. And they built a gorgeous church, or had built a gorgeous church. All right, so we're going to talk about the architectural style of the church, and then what happened when they all combined together, and what its beautiful neighborhood is like nowadays. But first of all, the history is such that in 1904 they decided to form their own parish, an ethnic-based parish within Northampton. They would have gone to St. Mary's Church, Northampton, or They might have got the Sacred Heart of French Canadian Church on King Street, either one, were downtown. But they wanted their own, of course, because everywhere else was getting their own. Wales got their own in 1902. Northampton got their own in 1904 parish. But the church itself was not built until 1912, and what a gorgeous building it is. And then the rectory alongside of it is built in 1913, and the school is a replacement school. The school was built right with a convent, but that's long gone. It has a 1970 replacement in this place. So, we're going to talk about all those features around the campus, and of course, like always, you should go visit and appreciate both inside and outside how gorgeous it looks.
And what architectural style is this church, and who designed it?
Right, John Donahue of Springfield designed it, and it was implemented with his typical plan of a facade which has light color masonry stones interplayed with somewhat darker stones, and they do it in a systematic manner, so it takes on a very nice look. It's not checkerboard, it's such that you might have these very light stones, only 1 out of 30 of the stones, but it's done in such a regular pattern that it becomes noticeably nice when it's done well, and that's what he done here. Now, John Donahue, born and raised and mostly worked in Springfield, was very well known around Boston too, where he had an office, and he came back to Springfield and did many works around the area. So many, I would guess, I know about 20, and there might be up to 30 or 40, or, there's very many of them around. And hopefully you can get to see this and really see his very distinctive style. And once you see a style like that, then other churches like that that are Catholic that have it were done by him.
And so getting back to our interview, what was done with all the Catholic churches of Northampton?
All right, they were grouped together about 20 years ago into one parish called St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, which still exists. And it was 5 parishes that came together. St. Mary's Blessed Sacrament, St. Mary's of Assumption, then St. John Cantius, and Sacred Heart all came together. Now, administration and regular masters are at that Sacred Heart building. They all each keep their building names, but they're under a different parish name. St. John Cantius role was they have one master and special events like marriages and baptisms. And St. Mary's would have marriages. The one up at St. Mary's Assumption up in Florence, they would have a master all the time, and of course special events. Nowadays, the St. John Cantius doesn't have anything. In fact, there's something that going repairs right now under a Community Preservation Act grant. They are getting its front facade changed around so it keeps this beautiful look.
And what is the neighborhood of the church like?
Okay, the neighborhood is gorgeous. It's a Pomeroy Street historic district. This is a very popular district within Northampton. It's just off of the main drag through town, behind the post office area, for instance. And what you can do there is walk around and see some very gorgeous historic buildings. And this church is one of the key elements within that neighborhood. It makes the whole neighborhood look much better by its incredible look. And I'm glad it has a Community Preservation Act grant that they're doing right now, because it's keeping this church at a very high level. No matter what happens to the church, whether it stays Catholic or whether it's sold, this facade will stay beautiful and help this Pomeroy Street historic district stay very, very beautiful looking and popular among all goers. So I hope you go out and see it. If you can, when it does open up again, I hope you get to go inside of it, and I hope you get to appreciate the Polish ethnic groups. Stained glass windows are set to be and a Polish orientation because St. John Cantius himself was a Polish saint.
And thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours and historical topics of your expertise. And we want to thank our listeners for tuning in. Thank you for tuning into our podcast, Canal Days, What Life Was Like in the Industrial Connecticut River Valley of Massachusetts. I am your host, Carrie, and joining us today is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Como. He personally offers and leads public and private tours, as well as presentations of historical sites within communities throughout the state of Massachusetts. Currently, the communities he has chosen to focus on this year are Holyoke, Chicopee, South Hadley, and East Hampton, and also Granby and Amherst as well. His tours spotlight the local canals, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks, streets, and selected historical houses within each community. Today's episode, we will be discussing the Sacred Heart Church, located in Northampton, Mass. So, what is the history of the entire church campus?
Okay, the pieces are very important, so we're going to talk about them. We're also going to talk about the architectural style of the church and its campus, and what's happened to this parish within Northampton. And then what is the whole location of it like? Now, the history is it's a French-Canadian ethnic group Catholic church in Northampton. French Canadians loved to work in those mills, and Northampton had many of them along the Mill River. They had many canals built in, and probably up to 7, and there were many mills put in place. And thus, the French Canadians developed to a high population level, and they started up their own ethnic group church. Now, the predecessor church they would have gone to would have been St. Mary's Church, and that has been along since 1845, and the modern Church of St. Mary's has been around, I think, 1889. So, we're talking about this campus here. The parish, as a community, formed in 1885, and what they did was they built a little wooden church for themselves. It was towards the back, I believe it was a little bit to the left. I think the modern church there would have been right over it, or almost right over it. So it was in back left mostly. So what the other pieces came, well, of course you don't want to depend upon a little wooden chapel because the populations of French Canadians would grow and grow. And only 31 years later, they were so large they needed their own large mortar building. And that's what they got on King Street. And that happened in 1916. All right. Now, the rectory was bought next door to it. Was an old-time home, probably in the Greek Revival style. It's still there, in fact. This home was called the Erastus Hopkins Home from 1830. But the Sacred Heart Church campus would buy that building, and it would become the rectory for the priest. All right, next up was the school. They would have had already a school as part of the original chapel area, but it was a tiny school, and surely had Sunday school there, but I think they started a smaller day school for them. And the real brick and mortar school itself didn't come around to 1911. Again, that was towards the back, more towards the center. And the convent itself came around in the year 1889, and that gives us a sense of probably when this original little school came around, probably 1889. And thus that school was replaced, of course, in 1911, but the convent kept in operation for a very long time. It's now gone, but it was around for an extremely long time, serving the French-Canadian population school children. St. Mary's had their own grammar and high school, which wasn't particularly far away, but the French Canadians wanted their own. They wanted to keep their traditions and the French going. And then the last component we'll talk about is chapel. The chapel came around in the year 1889. It was a small wooden chapel, and of course that is long gone itself.
And what architectural style is used in this church?
Okay, the church that's used nowadays is in a Georgian ecclesiastic style. It's a style that it almost looks like a pure classical style, but it's taken on a very gorgeous look, and those very gorgeous pillars, it brings you back to classical Greek, classical Rome. They're so large and it's so widely spread out. So it's a beautiful classical style.
And really quick, before we continue with the rest of our interview, just to fill our listeners in, if you want to find out more information or sign up for any of his various tours, you can check out his website at hoyocanaltour.org. And there you can find videos and podcasts of the stops along each of his tours, as well as photos and text of the historical sites throughout as well. And for private tours and other inquiries, you can email him directly at bobcat4214, capital B, @yahoo.com. And his tours make for fun, educational, outdoor activities for families and group parties. So getting back to our interview, what was done with the Catholic churches in Northampton?
About 20 years ago, they were combined into one parish, but they all five existed still independently with their original names, because the church in the Catholic religion never loses its original name. All right, now those churches are Blessed Sacrament, Our Lady Annunciation, Sacred Heart, St. John Cantius, and St. Mary's Church. They all combined into one under the parish name of St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. And they still are joined together. They still all exist. A couple of them don't really operate anymore. But Sacred Heart Church is now the administrative center of this St. Elizabeth Ann Seton Parish. So it's still heavily used, the heaviest of all the five. You still have masses there and special events of marriage and baptism. The rectory is the administration center for all five parishes or churches together. And so a lot is going on here. And each of them have their separate functions still. I'll go through what they're doing. The Blessed Sacrament still has masses there once a week. Our Lady Annunciation still has masses and still have prayer groups and marriages. The Sacred Heart I just told you about. St. John Cantius is undergoing renovations via a Community Preservation Act grant. And if they open up as a Catholic church, again, they'll probably be only for events. But if they're sold, it's still going to have that beautiful facade. And then the St. Mary's Church was recently sold a year ago. I hear it's going to lose its stained glass windows, but it's still a beautiful church. It's probably the oldest of all the built churches, and it definitely is the oldest of all the parishes, because it's the first one from 1845 in Northampton. So a lot is going on, and the combination of these churches is gorgeous.
And what is the neighborhood of this church like?
Okay, the neighborhood is King Street, and it's not far away from the most important corner in Northampton. And at that corner, you get the courthouse. A little bit up is the First Churches, and it's Thorns Market, of course. And there's, of course, going down King Street, a lot of business, but you find a little bit up the street Polish National Church, which is not part of the Roman Catholic Church diocese. So you have another church on that street. Also on King Street, it's the home of the first edition of the St. Mary's Catholic Church. It was way up there, about a half mile upwards. But there was the original cemetery also. It was moved. St. Mary's Cemetery is way up out of downtown now. St. Mary's Church is pretty much downtown still. But the neighborhood is important for what it used to be in the religious sense for the Catholics. So Northampton's a great place to visit. If you haven't gone there, you should go. If you haven't walked King Street, you think it's just too busy, the sidewalk is a fun walk. You'll be crossing the bike path at one point. It's not as good as Elm Street or Pleasant Street or Main Street, but still, it's a very fine walk, and it's fun to walk around, of course, the Sacred Heart Church campus.
And thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours and historical topics of your expertise. And we want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And you can check out a large selection of other podcasts on his website as well as on SoundCloud.com. And be sure to stay up to date. Thank you for tuning into our podcast, Canal Days, What Life is Like in the Industrial Connecticut River Valley of Massachusetts. I'm your host, Carrie, and joining us today is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Camus. He personally offers and leads public and private tours, as well as presentations of historical sites within communities throughout the state of Massachusetts. Currently, the communities he has chosen to focus on this year are Holyoke, Chicopee, South Hadley, and East Hampton, and also Granby and Amherst as well. His tours spotlight on the local canals, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks, streets, and selected historical houses within each community. In today's episode, we'll be discussing the Our Lady of the Annunciation Church. So tell us about the history of this church.
All right, it's a nice little history to it, and it's a nice little cozy place and a nice quaint look to it. It's a white clapboard church. So not only am I going to tell you about its history and its look, I'm going to tell you about who's buried alongside of it. And then also we're going to talk about the street as someone interested and lived on it. And then also we're going to talk about the rest of the campus, because it's a lot of buildings to a Catholic church campus usually, and this one is no different. All right, so the history is such that the parish itself, which means just the people, were set off from the St. Mary's parish in Northampton, and that was in 1878. So they started to have their masses in a small building nearby. And construction of the church happened in 1879. It started, and it was finished and ready by the next year, October 2nd, 1880. They dedicated the beautiful church there. And it still exists. 144 years later, it still looks the same. Now, the parishioners that it serves are the people that live in the Florence neighborhood of Northampton. A lot of Catholics were starting to move in this area. They were working in the silk mills of Florence and other mills up there. And sure enough, whenever you build a mill, the Catholic workers are going to follow you. And they're going to try to get those jobs. All right, so it's a very interesting place. I hope you visit it just to see how different it is compared to a lot of other things. And I was amazed about 20 years ago. I found it down this back street, Florence, and I was happy I went there.
And who is buried alongside the church?
All right, the tradition in the Catholic Church is that the founder priest, if he dies before about 1900, will be buried alongside that church that he found. Now, in Springfield, there's two churches where the founders are right outside their church, but also in Springfield, the cathedral has the first three bishops buried in the crypt of the church. In Holyoke, three founder pastors were buried alongside their church. In Northampton, which is the last place in Western Massachusetts I know of, they also had their pastor buried alongside their church. Now, he wasn't quite the founder. The founder was only that pastor for 3 months before he died. And thus, this person here, Patrick Callery, was not quite the founder, but he was the most influential person, and he was the second pastor of all. And so this beautiful gravestone has been put up, and also with a horizontal gravestone. And this monument was put up by the parishioners, and he had died July 30th, 1886, at age 39 years old. And they so beloved him that they put this up for him. He had been born in 1847 in Ireland, and he was a good pastor, and he tried to get a lot of parishioners to try to join into the parish more and more. And it's hard because you have all these people coming from far away, starting off a new life, and it's very difficult on them.
And really quick before we continue with the rest of our interview, just to fill our listeners in, if you want to find out more information or sign up for any of his various tours, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. And there you can also find videos and podcasts of the stops along each of his tours, as well as photos and text of the historical sites throughout as well. And for private tours and other inquiries, you can email him directly at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. And his tours make for fun, educational outdoor activities for families and group parties. So getting back to our interview, what else is nearby that is of great interest?
Right, it's a functional neighborhood, so there's going to be very interesting things nearby, of course. And it's a complete campus. It has various buildings that supported the campus, including the school and other buildings. But the most interesting thing on this street, and this is called Beacon Street, is the Frank Look House. And that was on 70 Beacon Street, built in 1891. Now, Frank Look, he is the person that Look Park in Northampton is named after. And most people know Northampton by Look Park. It's a very popular park. It's about 200 acres large. And Frank Look got very successful by being the president of the prophylactic company, a brush company. And with his extra money, he really built up a great house, and he built up a lot of charities within the city. And his wife, after Frank Look died, his wife set up an account and set up the construction of Look Park. And that happened during the late 1920s. By 1930s, it was ready. So Frank Look lived on this street, which is a great honor to the street. But there's other things around the Florence area that are very interesting, including Sojourner Truth lived in Florence for about 9 years, and her house still exists. So I invite you to walk around the neighborhood and pick up on a lot of these interesting features.
And tell us about the rest of the campus.
All right, so any Catholic Church campus, you expect that you'll have a rectory, a convent, a school, a social hall. Well, this campus does have those things. Most importantly, it has a school that was started in 1923 and is finished by 1925. So it served this campus in this Florence area very well through the years. And also, you had a social hall, but its social started its life as the Father Matthew Temperance Society Hall. It's at 45 Pine Street. You can see it very easily from the church. And this hall had another building next to its side, and they both were the social hall. They ended up turning it into the Annunciation Social Hall for the church itself. So Father Matthew was not associated with this location, but in general, he helped sponsor a lot of temperance halls for Catholics around the nation, and one of them was in Florence neighborhood. Now, when the Annunciation Parish needed a social hall, they were able to take this over, and it developed into a nice little campus. Now, the hall itself is from 1884, so it was made soon after the church was made, of course. Now, you might think, where is the rectory and where's the convent? Now, I think the rectory, in the beginning at least, was in the back of the church itself, but then they bought out another house nearby. And I think the convent was in the same situation. The convent was a house that they bought nearby, and they never had a separate convent. But when I figure out their locations, I'll put their addresses on the webpage that is for just the Annunciation Church.
And thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours and historical topics of your expertise. And we want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And you can check out a large selection of other podcasts on his website